Thank you, Rich, for the very kind words. I appreciate being here. Thank you, Corey, for all that you've done for U.S. Sailing. I have to say, we were in our first board meeting this morning without Corey, and I must have forgot because I'm looking around the room thinking someone's missing at the table, and I had a moment of sadness, actually. And I've been here 6 months, and I had that feeling. So I can only imagine the feeling that others have, knowing what she has led the board through over the past 3 years, past 2 years in particular. The magnitude of change was incredible. So I will miss you, and I'm sure everyone else will. So thank you. But thank you. Oh, and while I'm thanking people, I want to thank Katie Olette, Katie Alley, and Josh Toso, 3 people who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make this happen so that we can all show up and enjoy ourselves. Without them, we're not here doing what we're doing. So thank you guys for all that you did wherever you are. And obviously, thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see our stakeholders. It's wonderful for me to have a chance to connect directly with you. I've been with U.S. Sailing now for about 6 months. I've spent a lot of time learning from the great staff here. They've all been relatively patient with me, and I think I've been pseudo-patient with them, so it's been a good learning process for all of us. And I've been able to connect with a lot of people in the sailing community as well. I mean, many people that I see out here, you know, Matt, Linda, a lot of other people that I've had the opportunity to connect with in my time here as I've tried to quickly get up the learning curve of sailing. So I appreciate everybody's kindness and welcoming nature and patience as we get through this. So thank you all for that. Obviously, I have a lot more to learn about sailing, of course, which I look forward to. It's been a fun 6 months, but I look forward to the future ahead. But I have learned enough to develop a sense of what I think we do well and what I think we can improve on to serve all of our stakeholders well. And that's what we're here to talk about today. That's what I'm excited to get into today. So with that, we'll dive right in. So this is what we're going to do today. Obviously, everything starts with setting the stage with our mission statement and the strategic plan. That's the broad attack of how we're going to do our jobs. Second is just identifying exactly who our stakeholders are. And that may sound silly. I don't think it is, and we'll get into why I see it that way. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what we're here to do to serve all of our stakeholders well, and then save some time at the end for Q&A. With me in particular, if you like, and then I'll be here all day and happy to talk about anything and everything people want to talk about. All right, so why we exist has to start with our mission statement. I'm not going to read all this to you. I think everyone is well aware of our mission. Broadly stated, we're here to increase sailing participation and excellence. What I think is important about this mission statement is what's not there. What's not there is any one particular component of the sailing community. It doesn't say that any one particular component of the sailing community is any more important than the other. We simply need to increase sailing excellence and participation of all types. So next in line, as you go down the level of granularity, you get to our strategic plan. It adds some measure of detail to the mission statement. It calls out the important areas, obviously all done with one singular focus, which is serving sailors in the sailing community. It's still pretty broad. Strategic plans tend to be, but it's clear that we're here to support all sailors, and it provides the proper perspective. But I think for me, for my job, for the good people that I'm fortunate to work with on the staff, our task is to make this sort of the next level in granular analysis so we can actually attack our days and do our jobs. So this is one way that I like to look at what I've learned is the sailing community. This is our granular mission. These are the pieces that make up the sailing community. And I think however you want to articulate U.S. sailing, completing this puzzle appropriately is our fundamental responsibility. And I think if you take nothing out of this today other than one thing, I'd like you to understand that our fundamental objective is to complete this puzzle. If we complete this puzzle, because all of our stakeholders are represented in that puzzle to one degree or another, if we complete this puzzle, we have done our jobs well. Since I've been here in 6 months, I rarely has a week gone by when someone hasn't asked me the question, do you serve this group? Do you serve the Olympic team? Do you serve community sailing? Are you concerned with adaptive sailing? And the questions go on and on and on. And the questions were initially surprising to me because I didn't really understand why you were asking me that. Not having been a sailor, but knowing what national governing bodies do from my role in the USTA and just having been in the sports world as a professional for 25 years, I was well aware of national governing bodies. So the question really didn't make any sense to me initially. It then became enlightening to me that you were asking the question because something was missing that was causing you to ask us that question. And then what it really did is highlighted for me the challenge that I face and that we all face as a staff. It's clear that we need to recognize all of our stakeholders. It's clear that we need to serve all of our stakeholders. And this is the important part. It's clear that we need to build a business that will allow us to serve all of our stakeholders. So that's our task, to build a business that will allow us to serve all of our stakeholders. So before I get into how we're going to do that, let's just set the stage with who our stakeholders are, how big this organization is, the magnitude of what we have to do on a daily basis, and I think it's important just to have that for context. So we run a variety of adult and youth championships, more than 20 different types of regattas, including thousands of sailors. You can imagine the time and energy and people resources that go into making this work. We also provide a lot of services to other racing activities that aren't U.S. Sailing Championships, including providing over 1,000 offshore certificates a year and certifying 750 race officials. We have 42,000 members. You all know that well. We have memberships in a variety of categories, something for everybody. This is absolutely something that's going to get greater focus in the years ahead. Tons of corporate sponsors, companies that want to benefit their business from associating with us. Lots of work to make these relationships happen. More to come in years ahead, certainly beyond the endemics into the non-endemic companies as we get the chance to focus on this more. But these relationships are obviously critical to enabling us to do what we're here to do. Community sailing is obviously a big part of why we exist. There's a lot of great community sailing organizations that are part of our world in one form or another. We have two wonderful wonderful community sailing programs. The Seabull Sailors Program takes sailing and exposes it to the diverse world that's out there. REACH uses the great attributes of sailing and teaches STEM subjects to kids. These are just, and I've seen this a lot in sports in my prior roles, these are two wonderful examples to do exactly what something like sailing is supposed to do, which is to leverage the power of sailing, leverage the power of sports to make a difference in the world far beyond sailing. We have a variety of educational programs that I'm sure everybody knows about. We teach over 10,000 people a year, variety of aspects of sailing. It's a big part of what we do. Obviously, the Olympics gets a lot of attention for completely understandable reasons in our high performance efforts. It's not just the Olympics, but it's the hundreds of sailors who aspire to that. It's a consequential part of our business for obvious reasons, and obviously Paul joined us about 7 months ago to lead this important effort. We put on about 13 events a year that touch every aspect of the sailing community. It's events that, like this and others, that bring important people in the sailing community together to talk about issues that are important to all of us. It's a significant part of our obligation to promote sailing in all of its forms. We obviously have significant philanthropic efforts. There's almost 40,000 potential donors that we're here to connect with. We currently have over 2,000 donors that we're pleased to be working with, and they're happy to invest in U.S. sailing. I think it's important to note that many of these donors dedicate far more than financial resources to us. They spend time volunteering on committees, serving on task forces to provide support to our athletes far beyond money, which is important in general and certainly more important as Paul wants to do everything possible to support our athletes in every way, shape, and form. So this is the comprehensive way of looking at the sailing community. This is our North Star. This is our mission. And now that we have clarity with who our stakeholders are, as I said before, our task is to build a business that enables us to serve everybody well. So I just want to repeat that for the 17th time. Our task is to build a business that will enable us to serve all of our stakeholders well. So I want to get under the hood a bit. I think I may be sharing a little more detail than perhaps has previously been shared. I'm doing that intentionally so you can see what goes on behind the scenes to really make all of that work. So what's our path to excellence? The day I met Corey, and almost every day since then, she's used the phrase path to excellence. This is the path that she and the board set in motion a year plus ago with the magnitude of changes that they started to put through. It was clear, as you've heard me say, that we weren't serving all of our stakeholders well. As I said before, at first I didn't really understand why, because that sure seemed like the mission of a national governing body, and that sure seemed obvious to me. But it became clear to me that it wasn't about whether we wanted to serve all of our stakeholders or whether we thought we should serve all of our stakeholders, but whether we could serve all of our stakeholders. And once I saw it that way, a light bulb went off as to what I understood our business was, which is, again, to create a business that will allow us to serve all of our stakeholders. And I started to understand why the questions were being asked. There were so many stakeholders, often with competing desires, often pulling at us from very different directions to fight for what are understandable limited resources of time, people, and money. So difficult choices had to be made about, are we serving this piece of the puzzle or that piece of the puzzle? And then difficult choices went even further by saying, well, let's stop doing this piece of the puzzle. And I heard that loud and clear from the team when I joined here, that they were being pushed to, let's not do this or let's not do that because we're stretched thin or we're running out of money. And while that is entirely understandable, and we would all do that with our limited resources, it's the exact opposite of what our goal should be. It's the exact opposite of what we should aspire to do, which is to serve the entire community. So to build a business to do exactly that. So we're going to get under the hood a bit now and talk about the things that Corey and Rich have set in motion and that we've done as a staff just in the past 6 months to help make this happen. So one of the things that I talk a lot about, I use the analogy of building a house. Everybody here has bought a house, built a house. You walk into a house, the first thing you want to do is you want to go to the master bedroom. You want to see if it's nice. You want to look at the walk-in closet. You want to see if it's nice. You want to look at the deck off the second floor to see how the view is. Those are very wonderful things to do. Those are the fun things to do. If you don't have a good foundation in that house, if the foundation of that house is not solid, if the boiler doesn't work, if the electrical system is not up to par, we all know what's going to happen. The house is going to come crumbling down. The house is not going to work. Business is the exact same thing. So while we all like to talk about the fun things, it's also important to talk about the foundational things that are not necessarily flashy, but they're absolutely critical. So we were left here with the task of having to do 2 things at one time, a 2-pronged approach. Our task was to fix the foundation of the business because it needed and needs fixing, while at the same time doing some public-facing improvements so that we could get some momentum, so that we could drive some revenue. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg. You need the foundational improvements to do these things. But you need these things to give you the revenue momentum to do these things. So what do you do first? You can't do nothing. You have to do something. So our task has been to sort of blend these 2 things together and do the best we can, do these 2 things simultaneously with the best we can over the past 6 months, and that's what we're going to talk about. So the foundation of any organization is its people and its structure. And I'm not sure what people's views on organizational structures are, but they truly are. If you set them up right, they make the foundation of an organization solid and well-functioning. So it really is the foundation of any organization. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but what you see here is our org chart, and a couple things that are important to note from here. The colored boxes are the changes that have taken place over the past year or so. The red changes are the ones that happened before I joined, that Corey and the board set in motion. Paul joining as the Olympic Executive Director, Heather joining as Chief Financial Officer, Jill joining as Chief Development Officer, and then me. The boxes in green are the changes that the staff has put in place over the past 6 months. Obviously, Paul's upgrading the Olympic efforts. We've hired an HR person so we can focus on our people more than had been done. We have filled and upgraded our Chief Marketing Officer position with John. We've hired Andrew to help bring together our programs and services, and we're beefing up our offshore department. Also conducting an IT review to make sure that that part of the foundation is solid. So a lot has gone on, and we're not done yet. We need to hire a membership director. That's a position that has not got the love and attention that it so richly deserves. We're going to focus on that going forward, hiring a finance director so we can be smarter about the way we do things, so we can be more well-informed as we make decisions going forward. Hoping to hire a DEI person full-time to allow us to dedicate even more attention to that important area. So a lot of changes. And I think it's important to note the magnitude, there's more color on this page than there is gray. That is a lot of change for any organization to have to absorb in a short period of time. And I think it says a lot about the staff that's here with their dedication and their talent and their resiliency to be able to navigate this degree of change. Not easy, and I think many of them are breathing a sigh of relief that we're nearing the end of that. But it's the foundation of all good things. A second piece that's a foundational improvement that is critical to allowing us to do our job well is bringing financial clarity to how we run our business. Do we have the best financial reports? Are we speaking the same language? Are we asking the right questions? Are we getting answers in the right way? Those things are absolutely critical to allowing us to make intelligent decisions. It wasn't the case before. It was there was a lot of information flying around. There was a lot of energy being directed, and it wasn't necessarily as focused as it could be. So Heather and I and many others have spent time trying to get us all on the same page, speaking the same language, all of which will allow us to make quicker decisions, better decisions, which will allow just us to be a better national governing body. Second foundational thing we're focusing on a lot is our team dynamics. We are one organization. We have one focus in mind. There's no separation between the team and the association. There's no separation between the adults department and the youth department or the education department. We are one organization. There's only 55 of us. We're all basically together all the time. We are one organization talking about the exact same thing all the time, trying to serve one objective. Once you can do that, you remove a lot of friction that exists naturally between departments. If you remove that friction, things work easier. So we spent a lot of time doing that. Again, these are not flashy things, I know, but they are absolutely critical to the success of any organization. But we've also spent time doing some of the fun things. That's what we all want to spend time on. If I had my choice, I'd spend more time on these things. That's not necessarily the hand we were dealt. So, but we have spent time on these because, as I said before, we had to do both simultaneously. I'm not going to go through this. We've listed a bunch here in key areas, but there's a lot of public-facing, revenue-generating, momentum-generating improvements that have taken place. You can see a lot of them there. We've launched Project Pinnacle, raised over $20 million for Project Pinnacle already. Athlete support is dialing up. Athlete transparency, a big point for Paul, has gotten much better. Increased our offshore efforts, as I mentioned before. New sponsors are coming on board. Talks are already in place with more sponsors in the non-endemic category, which will produce additional revenue for us. On the community side, we've raised an additional $5 million for the Steeple Sailor program and are working on raising another $5 million. Ultimately will allow us to essentially triple the size of the Steeple Sailor program. So Those are just some examples of some of the public-facing improvements that are going on. And as I said, it blends with the foundational improvements to allow us to do both simultaneously. Once we get the foundation perfectly set, aspirational, but once we get that taken care of, there will be even more of these to come. So what does this mean for you all? It means for you all that you have a national governing body that understands its mission, that understands it may not have fulfilled that mission previously, that realizes why it may have missed the mark, and is doing what it can to fix those things, to create the foundation, to do the public-facing improvements so that we are the national governing body that all of our stakeholders deserve. All of this means the obvious. More resources, more programs, more benefits, more customer service, more athlete support, and ultimately, of course, just a better national governing body, which is better service to sailors regardless of what type of sailor you are. So I'm happy to have gone under the hood a bit with you all to give you some insight of what we do behind the scenes. It's good that you know what goes on so that you can understand more of what we do and so that we can be better responsive to you. So with that, I'm sure I still have time, and I'm happy to talk about anything and everything that people want to talk about.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Alan. Just before we get to the questions, just to give you guys a outlook of what today is going to be. Before we get to that, let's give Alan a round of applause. First presentation as the new CEO. So we wanted to make sure, and Rich said it best, I think, in terms of this event today, we want to make sure that it's at least 50-50, if not 60-40, listening and presenting. We want to make sure that we listen to everyone and all of our stakeholders. So we have a lot of different ways that questions are going to be asked or posed throughout the day here. And on your tables here, you can see at the very bottom, they're listed those different ways. Going through them very quickly. We do have some questions that came through from registration. Thank you all very much for putting those through. We'll be peppering the panelists throughout the day with those questions. If you are here in person and you don't feel shy, feel free to raise your hand. We have a couple mics extra and runners to be able to bring mics to you, and you can ask a question live. If you're feeling a little shy, there are Post-it notes on your tables. Feel free to write down the question for any one of the panels coming up, even if they haven't gone yet. We have easels in the back. Please feel free to put those up there, and we'll be gathering those throughout the breaks and be posing them to the panelists as well. Also, even if the panel is passed already and you have a question and you missed your chance, feel free to put those up there. We're going to be collecting all of the questions and answering them in one way or another after the event as well. Lastly, we do... Lastly, we do have an audience watching on the live stream. So people who are watching through the Starboard portal on the live stream, please feel free to put any questions that you have into the chat. We do have Stu Gilfillan, our Director of Education, in the back monitoring those. And if we have questions from the live stream, we will throw it to Stu in the back for those questions from the live stream. So before we get going, I have a couple of questions that came in from the registration that I'll start things off. If you have a question, you feel you want to pose it to Alan here, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get to you as we get through some of these. So, Alan, I'm going to start out the first question that I'm actually going to pose to the final panel of the leadership, but you get to answer it now, so we'll skip you at the leadership panel for it. The first question is, how do you define success for U.S. sailing?
Well, so can I go back in the slides? No, that's okay. So it's that puzzle. Our success is being able to serve all aspects of that puzzle so that you don't have to ask us if we serve that. You don't have to complain that we're not serving a particular puzzle piece well. Our job is to serve all of those puzzle pieces. I don't know that we're going to get there right away, because those to do all those the way that the board wants, the way that I've come to learn is critical. I think takes more than we have now, candidly. But I don't think there's any confusion about what our objective is, and I'm certain, to quote Corey, that we're on the path to excellence.
Great. So the second question talks a little bit about that puzzle that you showed beforehand, and we understand that there's a lot of constituents, and you mentioned that we want to serve everyone. So the question is, based on that, how will you prioritize and the diverse missions of U.S. sailing between the Olympics, Learn to Sail, diversity, et cetera, and every other constituent that we have? What's the prioritization plan?
Well, it's not easy to prioritize because what's more important to you may be less important to you, and what's more important to you may be different than what you care about. So we need to focus on all of the things. We also need to be realistic that we may not be able to hit all things on all cylinders right away. What I'd like to see happen is to not lose sight of the broad picture, to understand that our objective is to hit all pieces of the puzzle, and which doesn't necessarily mean that everything gets a 9 out of 10. Every piece of the puzzle gets a 9 out of 10. There may be some years that some take less, but I don't think there will ever be a time that anything should take 0. And ultimately, what happens is when we do our financial planning, which again is why the foundational financial information is so critical, so that we can be intelligent and strategic about what we're doing, is that when we sit down with the board and show them what our revenue looks like and what our expenses look like, the board will ultimately determine the budget, and the budget will dictate where our resources go. So I think if you bring it all together, Josh, what you have is an organization that is smarter and able to be more strategic and more thoughtful in its decision making, which will allow the difficult prioritization choices happen at the board level in the best possible way.
Another question came in that kind of talked about something you just hit on as well in terms of the financial, and I don't want to get too much into nitty gritty or call our CFO up here, but just broadly, the question is, how do you assess the financial planning, as you just talked about, in budgeting, when certain divisions within U.S. Sailing or certain departments are not generating income or are cost centers versus and provide member or association value rather than bringing in income?
Yeah, that question, I understand it, but anybody who's ever been involved in any business know that not every department is a profit center. Anybody ever seen the IT department be a profit center? It just doesn't work that way. They need to exist to serve the greater organization. And I think that if you try to break this down on a department by department basis, A, you're missing the point. B, you're creating infighting between departments when your singular job as an organization, my singular job in the role that I'm in, is to cause that not to happen. So I don't look at each department individually. We look at the budget overall. Each department has will have its own objectives revenue-wise to the extent that's appropriate, and each department will have its own objectives expense-wise, and that's appropriate for everybody. And they're going to be managed accordingly. They're going to understand their budget. They're going to, not to go back to the point about financial clarity, they're going to be involved in creating their budget. This is not a budget that's going to be told to them. This is going to be a budget that they are going to help create. They're going to own it. They won't necessarily dictate it, but they will own it. And as a result, they're going to manage their expenses, they're going to manage their revenue, and ultimately, it's our job as a leadership team, Paul, me, Heather, Jill, John, and Andrew, to bring all that together for the good of the organization, so that at the end of the day, as I say, if anyone's seen a spreadsheet, the bottom right-hand number is the one that's important.
One final question from the registration questions that came in, just shifting gears a little bit. Can you give us a little update on the offshore department, as that's been a department that's been in a little bit of flux with U.S. Sailing?
Sure, except I have to say thank you to Matt Gallagher, because 7 months ago I did not know what offshore meant. I learned a phrase early on: smart people understand complicated things. Really smart people can make complicated things possible so everyone can understand it. So by definition, Matt is a really smart person because he's helped me understand it. So that's obviously been something that was a bit of a rude awakening for U.S. Sailing, that we weren't well staffed, there wasn't sufficient redundancy, and we weren't providing appropriate service to an important part of our world. That really became clear a couple weeks after I started, with some organizational changes. John Pierce, who I know is here somewhere, stepped up big time to to play a large role in that, to helping us right the ship. Matt, as I mentioned, a bunch of other people, our partners, ORA, ORC, IRC, everybody stepped up to help us get through this, and that was a challenge. I think ultimately, and listening to people like Matt, like Stan, like Henry, others who are knowledgeable in this area, we've put a plan in place to do sort of several things which will serve the offshore world significantly better. Hiring a replacement person to focus on this, who's one of the experts in the area. Plans in place to hire at least one other full-time person if we can get it through the budget. So rather than having one full-time person dedicated to offshore ratings, we would have two. That's sort of objective number two. Hiring Andrew, who started with us a couple weeks ago, is important too. To have a senior executive helping support offshore, and he also has offshore experience. So right there, if we're able to and we've already accomplished points 1 and point 3, if we're able to accomplish point 2, which is the second ratings officer, we'll have gone from one full-time ratings person to 2.5. So by definition, that'll be better. The second thing that'll make it better, a big point of Stan's early on that became clear to me, another smart person that made it easy for me to understand, was combining the offshore activities with the IT activities. And obviously we didn't want offshore to be seen off to the side. That's not an appropriate way to look at it. We didn't want IT to be seen as off to the other side. Bringing them together, given the natural relationship between the two, I think will go a long way there. So we have that plan in place that everyone's been working on, and we're not out of the woods yet, but we're getting there and feel pretty good about that.